What if I told you that the most unforgettable tears Meghan Markle ever shed weren't real? That the trembling voice you heard in the Oprah interview, the quivering lip, the pauses that seemed so natural, were all staged like a Hollywood script? Now imagine the person exposing this isn't a critic, not a royal watcher, not a former aide, but her own mother, Doria Ragland, the one woman who was supposed to be Meghan's safe place, her protector, her fiercest defender, now admitting she rehearsed those tears with her daughter, admitting she helped her lie. Can you even wrap your head around that? Let's not sugarcoat it. If this is true, it changes everything. It rewrites the way we look at one of the most controversial women in modern royal history. Because Meghan didn't just cry for herself. She cried for the cameras, for millions of viewers, for the sympathy of the world. And if even that was staged, then what else was? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Think back to that iconic moment in 2021. The Oprah special, the warm California garden. Meghan, dressed in black with delicate embroidery, a white lotus flower blooming across her shoulder. The perfect picture of vulnerability. She spoke of pain, racism, loneliness, suicidal thoughts. She cried. Oprah leaned in with her legendary "What?" and the world gasped. Millions believed they were watching an unscripted confession, the raw pain of a woman wronged by an ancient institution. But what if it wasn't raw? What if it wasn't unscripted? What if, just days earlier, Meghan had been standing in front of her mother, saying, "No, not like that. You have to hold your breath before the tear falls. Look to the side. Tilt your head down. Practice it again." And Doria, the quiet, soft-spoken yoga instructor, went along with it. She played the part. She rehearsed her daughter's lines. She timed her tears. She was complicit. Now she regrets it. This isn't just gossip. This is betrayal. A daughter using her mother to sell a story. A mother realizing too late that she was part of a con. And the world, the audience, you and I, were the ones deceived. Does that shock you? Or did you already suspect something was off when you watched Meghan's performance? Let's break it down. Meghan has always had a knack for performance. She was an actress, trained in expression, trained to cry on cue, trained to hold an audience. But this wasn't a set. This wasn't Suits. This was real life. Real reputations. Real monarchy. Real consequences. And here's where the story gets twisted. Because when she transitioned from actress to Duchess, Meghan didn't leave Hollywood behind. She took Hollywood with her. She didn't stop performing. She just changed her stage. And the Oprah interview wasn't the first act. Think back further. Remember the speeches where Meghan would choke up just slightly when speaking about Archie? Remember the carefully placed pauses when talking about her struggles as a new mother? The trembling voice in South Africa when she said, "Not many people have asked if I'm okay." At the time, it felt raw. It felt spontaneous. But looking back now, with Doria's confession in mind, doesn't it feel different? Doesn't it feel rehearsed? And here's the uncomfortable truth. It worked. The performance worked. The tears melted hearts. Headlines went global. Hashtags trended, and the narrative shifted. Meghan wasn't a royal troublemaker. She wasn't a Hollywood diva. She was a victim. And the world loves a victim. The world protects a victim. The world opens its wallet for a victim. Do you see how powerful that role is? Let's talk about the psychology for a second. When someone cries, we instinctively trust them more. Tears trigger empathy. It's primal. We don't question the validity of those tears. We just feel them. Meghan knew that. And apparently, so did Doria. Which begs the question, what mother helps her child fake pain? What mother teaches her daughter to manipulate with tears? Maybe Doria thought she was protecting Meghan. Maybe she believed her daughter needed the world's sympathy to survive the brutal British press. Maybe, in her own way, she thought she was helping. But now, years later, she admits it was a mistake. She admits she regrets it. That regret is telling. Because regret only comes when the lie goes too far. When the performance doesn't stop. When the line between acting and reality blurs so badly, even family can't find their way back. Picture Doria now, alone, reflecting, thinking about the role she played in building Meghan's public persona. Remember, Doria was the only family member at Meghan's royal wedding. She sat alone, proud, supportive, the image of dignity. For years, she was silent, never speaking out, never betraying her daughter's secrets. Until now. And when she finally spoke, She dropped a bombshell. We rehearsed the tears. I regret helping her lie. Do you feel that? That chill down your spine? Because if Meghan's most famous tears were staged, then every story, every confession, every heartfelt moment is now suspect. Which parts were real? Which parts were performance? And think about what this does to Meghan's credibility. You can forgive a misstep. You can forgive ambition. But can you forgive manufactured pain? Can you forgive staged victimhood? Because if you can't, then Meghan isn't just controversial anymore. She's finished. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This story isn't just about Meghan. It's about Doria too. A mother who kept silent. A mother who now feels guilty. And that guilt is powerful. Because Doria's silence all these years gave Meghan credibility. People trusted her more because her mother never contradicted her. But now that silence is broken, everything unravels. And you have to ask yourself, why now? Why did Doria wait until now to confess? Did something happen behind the scenes? Did she reach her breaking point? Or is this the moment when even her mother can no longer support the performance? Let's take it one step further. If Meghan rehearsed the Oprah interview, what else did she rehearse? Was her walkout from the royal family rehearsed? Was her famous letter to her father rehearsed? Was her tearful speech at the UN rehearsed? Suddenly, nothing feels real anymore. Suddenly, Meghan's entire public life feels like one long script. And yet, here's the twist. She got away with it. For years, she got away with it. Until now. Until her mother spoke. And that's the kind of betrayal that cuts deepest. Not because Meghan fooled us, but because she fooled her own mother. She made her own mother a prop in her drama. And that raises the most haunting question of all. If Meghan could script her own mother, who else has she scripted? Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever noticed how some people don't just live their lives, they curate them? Every move, every smile, every word, polished like a diamond under the spotlight. Now, imagine taking that curation to an entirely new level. Imagine creating a persona so convincing, so finely tuned, that millions around the world mistake it for reality. That's Meghan Markle. And that's where our story truly begins. When Meghan first appeared on the royal scene, the world wanted to believe. She was fresh, modern, different from the stiff upper lip royals the public had grown accustomed to. An American actress stepping into a 1,000-year-old monarchy. It sounded like a fairy tale. She was a breath of air the palace desperately needed, or at least that's what the media told us. And Meghan knew exactly how to feed that narrative. This wasn't accidental. Meghan had spent years in Hollywood. Years learning how to work an audience, how to hold eye contact with a camera, how to deliver a line that sounded heartfelt even when it was scripted. Think about that for a moment. An actress doesn't just memorize words. She learns to embody emotion. She learns to sell it. And Meghan wasn't just any actress. She was one who had clawed her way into a brutal industry. She understood performance at its core. So when she walked into the royal world, she didn't walk in as Meghan the woman. She walked in as Meghan the role. And let's be honest, she played it brilliantly. The compassionate humanitarian. The underdog outsider. The woman of color breaking barriers in a traditionally white institution. Every angle was designed to spark headlines, to hook hearts. Do you remember the engagement interview? Meghan leaned into Harry's shoulder, laughing, glowing, looking every inch the woman in love. Yet even then, some noticed something just a little too polished about her delivery. The way she said, yes, it was just an amazing surprise, so romantic, as if reading a line from a script. Too smooth, too perfect. And isn't that the hallmark of a crafted persona? Too good to be true. Now, think about how quickly she went from the People's Princess 2.0 to the woman at war with the palace. That transformation didn't happen by accident. It was strategy. Step 1, win public love. Step 2, position herself as the victim when the tide inevitably turned. Step 3, cash in on the sympathy. It's classic storytelling. The rise, the conflict, the fall, and the redemption. Meghan wasn't just living her life, she was writing her own movie, and we were all watching it play out in real time. But here's the kicker. While we saw a fairy tale, the palace saw a threat. From the very beginning, insiders whispered that Meghan was different, not because of her race, but because of her control. Most royals let their staff manage their image. Meghan managed hers herself. Every public appearance was choreographed, every word with the press weight, Every outfit chosen not just for style, but for symbolism. White shirts for humility, black for gravitas, earth tones to match Diana's iconic looks. Do you think that was coincidence? Or do you think Meghan knew exactly how to conjure Diana's ghost to draw sympathy and comparison? And here's where Doria enters the frame again. Meghan wasn't crafting this persona alone. Doria was her anchor, her witness, the living proof of the narrative Meghan spun. A single mother raising her daughter against the odds. A woman of dignity in the face of adversity. The contrast with Thomas Markle, Meghan's estranged father, was striking. Meghan understood optics. Doria represented virtue, loyalty, grace. Thomas represented chaos and betrayal. Which one would the public side with? Exactly. And Meghan used that to her advantage. But every performance has cracks, doesn't it? Every mask eventually slips. And Meghan's mask slipped not once, but several times. Remember the moment in South Africa when she told a journalist, "Not many people have asked if I'm okay?" On the surface, it was a raw confession. But look closer. The perfectly timed pause. The voice crack at exactly the right moment. The soulful eyes turned to the camera. Too perfect. Too rehearsed. Doesn't it remind you of something? Like a scene from a drama designed to tug at your heartstrings. And it worked. The headlines exploded. Meghan, the struggling duchess. Meghan, the lonely new mother. Meghan, abandoned by the cold institution. Sympathy poured in. But now, with Doria's confession in mind, doesn't it feel staged? Doesn't it feel like another line in the script? Let's pull back even further. Meghan's early life was already about reinvention. From Meghan Markle, the girl from Los Angeles, to Meghan, the actress. From Meghan the actress to Meghan the humanitarian. From Meghan the humanitarian to Meghan the Duchess. Each stage carefully built, each one marketed like a brand. But here's the question. At what point does reinvention become deception? At what point does self-branding become manipulation? And manipulation is exactly what critics accuse her of. Crafting a persona that isn't just about survival, but about domination. About controlling the narrative at any cost. And when the palace, the press, or even her own family challenged that narrative, Meghan flipped the script. She wasn't the manipulator. She was the victim. She wasn't controlling the story. She was silenced. Do you see the genius? If you're always the victim, no one can question your motives. But genius can also be dangerous. Because when you live too long as a persona, the line between reality and performance blurs. Meghan, by all accounts, lives in that blurred space. Ask yourself, is she even aware when she's performing anymore? Or has the performance become who she is? And that's the chilling part. Because if Meghan can convince the world she's a victim, even when rehearsed, then truth doesn't matter anymore. Perception does. Emotion does. Tears do. And that's where the power lies. But remember this. Power built on lies eventually collapses. And the cracks in Meghan's persona? They were about to shatter wide open. Because while she convinced millions of her story, she couldn't convince everyone. Some saw through it. Some whispered about the rehearsals. Some questioned her timing. And those whispers? They would soon turn into roars. Because the carefully crafted persona that Meghan built, piece by piece, tier by tier, was about to be exposed by the one person who knew the truth from the beginning, her mother. And once that truth was out, there was no going back. But what came next would leave even Meghan's staunchest defenders questioning everything they thought they knew about her, and about the story she sold to the world. What would make a mother go along with a lie? Not just any lie, but one so grand, so public, that it reshaped the way millions of people saw her daughter. That's the uncomfortable question at the heart of Doria Ragland's involvement in Meghan Markle's carefully crafted persona. And the truth, when you peel back the layers, is darker than anyone dared to imagine. Because Doria wasn't just a bystander. She wasn't just standing quietly in the background while Meghan spun her stories. She was part of the machinery. She played the role of the silent, dignified mother. The one person who never contradicted Meghan, never sold her out, never spoke against her. That silence was powerful. It gave Meghan's words weight. After all, if Meghan's own mother wasn't denying her stories, then surely they had to be true, right? But silence is one thing. Active participation is another. And according to her own words, Doria didn't just stay silent. She helped. She rehearsed. She practiced the performance alongside her daughter. She sat in the room while Meghan perfected her victim role. She coached, She nodded, she validated. And by doing so, she became part of the deception. Why? That's the question that haunts this chapter. Why would a mother risk her credibility, her own dignity, for her daughter's performance? Maybe it started innocently. Maybe Meghan came to her mother, overwhelmed, scared, desperate to control the way the world saw her. Maybe she said, "Mom, I just need your help. I need to look real. I need to look broken. Please, just run these lines with me." And what mother, wanting to protect her child, wouldn't help? Maybe at first it felt harmless. Just a rehearsal. Just a practice run. But once you step into that world of rehearsed pain, it's hard to step out. And Doria stayed in it. She stayed in it through Meghan's transition into royal life, through the Oprah interview, through every staged moment of vulnerability. She became a silent partner in her daughter's theater. Let's not forget, Doria's image mattered too. She was portrayed as the calm, centered yoga instructor, the elegant single mother who raised Meghan against all odds. She was, in many ways, the opposite of Thomas Markle, Meghan's estranged father. Where he was loud and chaotic, she was serene and supportive. Meghan used that contrast. Doria's silence made her look noble. Thomas's outbursts made Meghan look victimized. It was perfect casting. A family drama with clear heroes and villains. And Meghan was directing it. But here's the twist. Every performance requires supporting actors. And Doria, whether she realized it or not, was cast in that role. Meghan didn't just need her presence. She needed her complicity. She needed her mother to validate the narrative, if not with words, then with carefully rehearsed tears and carefully timed silence. Think about the Oprah interview again. The cameras cut to Meghan, eyes brimming with tears. The silence hangs heavy in the air. Oprah leans forward, her voice low, her face shocked. Were you silent, or were you silenced? Millions held their breath. And in that moment, Doria was off camera, but she wasn't irrelevant. Her presence, her prior rehearsals with Meghan, made those tears possible. Behind every dramatic pause, every crack in Meghan's voice, was a mother who had helped her practice the scene. And here's where the guilt creeps in. Doria admits now that she regrets it. She regrets helping her daughter lie. She regrets being part of the performance. That regret is powerful because it tells us this wasn't just about loyalty. It wasn't just about protecting Meghan. It was about manipulation. And once the manipulation became too big to ignore, even Doria couldn't carry the weight anymore. Let's ask the hard question. Did Doria benefit from this performance too? Maybe not financially, not in the same way Meghan did, but socially, emotionally, she was elevated. She was the noble mother of the Duchess. She was admired for her dignity, praised for her silence. She got to sit alone in St. George's Chapel at the royal wedding, the world's cameras fixed on her as a symbol of grace. She became part of the fairy tale. And maybe, just maybe, that was intoxicating. But fairy tales don't last. The cracks always show. And when they did, the cost was higher than anyone imagined. Because once Doria broke her silence, the illusion shattered. Imagine what it must feel like for Meghan now, knowing her own mother has spoken out. The one person she thought would always stay in her corner, now exposing the rehearsals. Now saying the tears were fake. It's the ultimate betrayal. But is it betrayal, or is it redemption? Because from Doria's perspective, speaking out is an act of conscience. It's a way to free herself from the burden of complicity. It's her way of saying, I can't carry this lie anymore. And that in itself is tragic. A mother who once supported her daughter, now forced to expose her to save herself. And what does that say about Meghan's control over her mother? If Meghan could script her own mother, if she could tell her when to cry, when to pause, when to stay silent, then what does that reveal about the lengths she'll go to control everyone around her? Harry, the palace staff, even Oprah. It paints a chilling picture. Because if Meghan can turn her own mother into a prop, then no one in her life is safe from being scripted. No one. And here's where the story takes its sharpest turn yet. Because Doria's regret isn't just about what happened in the past. It's about what's still happening now. She knows Meghan isn't done performing. She knows the script continues. And her breaking silence isn't just about confessing. It's about warning. A warning to Meghan. A warning to Harry. A warning to the world. But what did Meghan do with her mother's regret? Did she listen? Did she change? Or did she double down on the act? The answer will shock you. Because what came next revealed just how deep the performance really went. and it centered on one of the most explosive interviews of the decade. Close your eyes for just a moment and picture it. The lush California garden, the wicker chairs, the sunlight gently filtering through the trees. Oprah Winfrey leaning forward with that trademark intensity in her eyes. And Meghan Markle, dressed in black, a symbolic choice, embroidered with a delicate white lotus flower that screamed resilience and purity. Millions were glued to their screens that night, convinced they were about to witness a raw, unfiltered confession. The tears, the trembling voice, the revelations that would shake the monarchy. But here's the unsettling truth. That spontaneous vulnerability, that unscripted heartbreak, it wasn't as raw as the world believed. Behind the curtains, far from Oprah's cameras, those tears had already been rehearsed. Rehearsed with Doria, practiced like lines from a script, fine-tuned for maximum impact. And doesn't that change everything? Because the Oprah interview wasn't just a conversation. It was a global stage. Meghan knew the power of that platform. Oprah wasn't just a talk show host. She was an empire. Her interviews could make or break reputations. If Meghan could pull off the performance of her life, she wouldn't just win sympathy. She would cement herself as the eternal victim of the royal family, the wronged duchess silenced by an archaic institution. Now, let's dissect it piece by piece. The wardrobe. Meghan's choice of black wasn't accidental. Black conveys mourning, loss, gravitas. The lotus embroidery whispered of purity rising from the mud. It was symbolism, not style. Oprah's team later admitted Meghan had full control over her image that day. Every stitch of fabric carried meaning. Every gesture was intentional. Even her hair, soft, pulled back, maternal. Nothing loud, nothing Hollywood. Just vulnerability. The setting. Oprah's California estate was the perfect backdrop. No palace, no grandeur, no intimidation. Just greenery and openness, an atmosphere of honesty. But was it? Or was it another set, another stage crafted to feel intimate while broadcasting to millions? And then, the tears. When Meghan told Oprah she had contemplated ending her life, her voice cracked perfectly on cue. Her hands folded delicately, her eyes shimmering just enough to glisten without spilling into sobs. It looked authentic. It felt authentic. But how many of you noticed the controlled breathing, the perfectly timed pause before delivering each bombshell? That's acting technique. That's training. That's performance. And Doria was part of it. She admitted they practiced. Meghan would say, "Okay, Mom, this is the part where I tell Oprah about the nights I cried in the palace. Watch my eyes. Tell me if it looks real. Tell me if my lip trembles enough." And Doria, loving her daughter, played along. She rehearsed lines with her. She rehearsed silences. She rehearsed how to hold her body when confessing pain. Now here's the kicker. Oprah herself had no idea. She thought she was drawing out spontaneous truth. She thought she was watching an unscripted breakdown. But in reality, she was interviewing a trained actress at the height of her career-defining role. Meghan had never been more prepared. And the irony? She didn't even need a script in her hands. The script was in her blood, and the world fell for it. The next morning, headlines exploded. Meghan exposes royal racism. Meghan breaks down in tears. Harry and Meghan versus The Crown. Social media lit up with hashtags. Politicians weighed in. Activists quoted her words as gospel. Sympathy soared. Netflix deals followed. Spotify deals followed. The persona was solidified. But ask yourself this. If you knew then what you know now, that those tears were rehearsed, that her mother helped stage them, would you have believed her so easily? Would you have let her words pierce so deeply? Because the impact wasn't just emotional, it was political. Meghan's performance forced Buckingham Palace into crisis mode. Statements had to be drafted. Investigations into alleged racism were whispered about. Harry and Meghan were hailed as brave truth-tellers. But if even a fraction of that was rehearsed, then what does that say about the real truth? Let's not forget the timing. The interview aired while Prince Philip, frail and hospitalized, was nearing the end of his life. The palace begged for a delay. Meghan refused. Why? Because drama requires timing. A performance lands best when the stakes are highest. And that's exactly what she ensured. And then there was Harry, sitting beside Meghan, nodding, supporting, occasionally dropping his own revelations. Was he rehearsed too? Or was he simply caught in Meghan's performance, swept up in her narrative? Some believe Harry was fully aware. Others believe he was manipulated, coached just like Doria. Either way, he played his part. The loyal husband standing by his wife. Another role in the grand script. But here's where the cracks began to show. In the weeks following the interview, fact-checkers dug in. Some of Meghan's claims didn't add up. The timeline of conversations, the details about Archie's title, even the supposed silences of palace officials, all began to unravel. Yet Meghan doubled down. She clung to her role, refusing to admit even the slightest exaggeration. Because in performance, once you break character, the illusion collapses. And what of Doria? While Meghan basked in global sympathy, Doria carried a different weight. She knew those tears weren't entirely real. She knew the confession about suicidal thoughts had been rehearsed. And that knowledge burned. At first, she stayed quiet, as she always had. But silence has a way of becoming unbearable when it's holding up a lie this big. And so, years later, when she finally admitted the truth, we rehearsed the tears. I regret helping her lie. It shattered not just Meghan's credibility, but the very foundation of that Oprah moment. Think about it. The Oprah interview was Meghan's defining act, the pinnacle of her victim persona. And if that was staged, then every other performance collapses in its shadow. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a chilling reality. Meghan's most powerful weapon wasn't truth, but performance. She didn't defeat the monarchy with facts. She defeated it with emotion, with rehearsed pain, with her mother as her silent director. And yet, here's the cliffhanger. The Oprah interview, as rehearsed as it may have been, wasn't the final act. It was only the beginning. Because what followed was an even darker chapter, one where Meghan perfected the art of victimhood, and the lies only grew bigger, bolder, and more dangerous. And what came next would prove that the Oprah interview wasn't the climax of the story, it was just Act 1. Why do some people always seem to emerge as the victim in every story? No matter the conflict, no matter the context, they walk away cloaked in sympathy while everyone else is painted as the aggressor. It's not luck. It's not coincidence. It's a skill, a craft, an art form. And Meghan Markle mastered it like few ever have. The victim narrative has always been powerful. Throughout history, societies rallied behind the vulnerable. We instinctively protect those who appear hurt, silenced, or oppressed. Our emotions override logic. We don't question. We feel. And Meghan understood that better than anyone. She learned that if she could embody the victim role, if she could perfect the art of looking wronged, she could control the story every time. Let's rewind. Long before Oprah, long before the Sussex titles, even back during her Hollywood days, Meghan knew how to play sympathy like a violin. Former colleagues on Suits described her as ambitious, determined, sometimes calculating. But whenever tension arose, Meghan found ways to soften her image. A wounded look, a quiet pause, a subtle insinuation that she wasn't being given a fair chance. People backed down. People gave in. Victimhood worked. Now fast forward to the royal stage. From day one, Meghan positioned herself as an outsider. An American, biracial, divorced actress. The narrative was irresistible. A modern woman breaking into the world's most ancient institution. And what's the easiest way to cement that narrative? By leaning into the victim role. By framing herself as the underdog. By suggesting the institution resisted her at every turn. Do you remember that tour in South Africa? Meghan and Harry visiting underprivileged communities, holding hands with children, posing with families. It was supposed to be about charity, but Meghan turned the spotlight back onto herself. When the ITV journalist asked her how she was coping, she didn't talk about the people she was helping. She didn't talk about the children she'd just visited. Instead, she looked down, her voice trembling, and said, "Not many people have asked if I'm okay." The world stopped. That one line overshadowed the entire tour. Suddenly, it wasn't about South Africa's struggles, it was about Meghan's. And the headlines the next day proved it. Meghan breaks down. The lonely Duchess. A cry for help. In that moment, Meghan had hijacked the global stage, turning herself into the victim of the story. But here's where the brilliance lies. Victimhood isn't just about words. It's about timing. It's about delivery. It's about the choreography of emotion. The long pause before speaking. The perfectly timed tear. The downcast eyes that make you lean in closer. Meghan had mastered every one of those techniques. They weren't accidents. They were strategies. And it didn't stop there. The art of victimhood requires a villain. A victim can't exist without someone or something to blame. Enter the monarchy. Enter the British press. Enter Thomas Markle, her father. Meghan crafted villains for every stage of her life. The cold, archaic palace. The racist, cruel tabloids. The selfish, opportunistic father. Each one carefully positioned to make her look smaller, weaker, more wronged. Each one reinforcing her role as the victim. But here's the irony. Victims don't usually have power. Victims don't usually control narratives. Victims don't usually have Netflix deals, multi-million-dollar mansions, or global media platforms. Meghan did. She was one of the most privileged women in the world, and yet she managed to convince millions she was oppressed. That's not luck. That's mastery of victimhood as performance. And Doria's role? Crucial. She gave Meghan authenticity. A mother's presence, her calm dignity, added weight to Meghan's narrative. Doria didn't need to say much. Her silence was enough. She was the supporting actor, the witness, who validated Meghan's pain without uttering a word. When Doria sat quietly in Oprah's garden, her very presence whispered, "This is real. Believe her." But now we know. Behind closed doors, even those silences were rehearsed. And it makes you wonder, how many of Meghan's most emotional public moments were rehearsed? Think of the hand clutching her bump during pregnancy appearances, always exaggerated, always framed for the cameras. Was that maternal pride, or a visual cue meant to remind us of her vulnerability? Think of the way she held Archie during his first photo shoot, swaddled tightly, her body curled protectively around him as if shielding him from an invisible enemy. Was that natural motherhood, or part of the act? The genius of Meghan's victimhood is that it didn't just win sympathy, it silenced criticism. Whenever journalists raised questions, whenever staff leaked frustrations, Meghan flipped the narrative. She wasn't difficult. She wasn't controlling. She was targeted. She was bullied. She was suffering. And who dares to criticize a victim without looking cruel? It's a shield, a weapon, an unbreakable defense. But there's danger in living as a perpetual victim. Because once the truth begins to slip out, once people start questioning, the entire illusion shatters. Victimhood requires consistency. The moment contradictions appear, the moment rehearsals are exposed, the sympathy evaporates. And that's where Meghan finds herself now. Doria's confession is the ultimate crack in the illusion. If even Meghan's tears were rehearsed, if even her pain was staged, then what's left to believe? If the victim role was an act, then Meghan wasn't just playing the underdog. She was manipulating the world. And here's the question I want to ask you directly. If Meghan's victimhood was rehearsed, if it was part of a performance, then was the Oprah interview a documentary? Or was it theater? Was it truth? Or was it a play dressed as reality? Because the art of victimhood, as Meghan perfected it, was never about telling the truth. It was about telling a story that made her the eternal victim, a story that made everyone else the villain. But what happens when the victim role no longer works? What happens when the audience realizes they've been played? Because that's exactly what was about to happen. The sympathy Meghan so carefully built began to collapse. And the more she tried to control the story, the more it slipped out of her hands. And the collapse didn't come from her enemies. It didn't come from the press. It didn't come from the palace. It came from her mother. And what came next would force Meghan to confront the very lies she had built her empire on. Because once the mask slipped, there was no way to put it back on. Do you remember where you were when the Oprah interview aired? Do you remember the way social media exploded? The way every news outlet across the globe splashed Meghan's face on their front page? The way hashtags like #WeStandWithMeghan trended in minutes? Millions of people weren't just watching, they were believing. They believed every word, every tear, every pause. And that belief is what made the performance so powerful. Because here's the truth, Meghan's story worked. It did exactly what it was designed to do. It made the public see her as the wrong duchess, trapped in a cold and racist institution, silenced by the monarchy, abandoned by her own family. The world bought the script. Hook, line, and sinker. Let's break down why. First, Meghan tapped into something bigger than herself. The narrative of race. The narrative of women silenced by patriarchy. The narrative of outsiders crushed by elitist institutions. These are real issues, raw nerves in society. And Meghan tied her personal story to them like an actress tying herself to a blockbuster script. She wasn't just Meghan Markle, a duchess with grievances. She was a symbol of every woman who had ever been silenced, every person of color who had ever felt excluded. And once you position yourself as a symbol, people project their own experiences onto you. They don't just believe you, they fight for you. Second, she knew the power of emotional cues. That trembling voice when she said she thought of ending her life. That sharp intake of breath when she revealed someone in the royal family questioned her baby's skin color. The carefully timed pauses. The way her eyes welled up but never spilled into full sobs, strong enough to show pain, controlled enough to keep her words clear. This wasn't sloppy emotion. This was measured. This was art. And the audience, hungry for authenticity, swallowed it whole. Third, Meghan had credibility by proxy. Oprah wasn't just anyone. Oprah is the queen of empathy, the woman whose interviews have defined generations. If Oprah believed Meghan, then who were we to doubt her? Millions saw Oprah lean in, shocked, horrified, and they mirrored her reaction. If Oprah's face said, "This is true," then it must be true. And then there was Doria, sitting quietly, her presence silent but powerful. She didn't contradict her daughter. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't fidget or break the illusion. She sat calm, dignified, the perfect supporting character in Meghan's play. Her silence was Meghan's greatest weapon. Because if Meghan's own mother wasn't disputing these claims, then surely they had to be real, right? The public responded exactly as Meghan intended. Sympathy turned into outrage. Outrage at the monarchy, at the press, at the system. The palace was thrown into crisis. Politicians in America weighed in, calling for investigations into royal racism. Celebrities tweeted their support. Friends rushed to Meghan's defense. For a while, she wasn't just a duchess. She was a global cause. But here's the chilling reality. The public didn't just believe Meghan. They defended her aggressively. Anyone who questioned her narrative was branded racist, sexist, cruel. Journalists who dared to fact-check her claims were accused of bigotry. Royal watchers who pointed out contradictions were silenced. Meghan's victimhood became untouchable. And that's how powerful the performance was. Now think about the mechanics of that. Meghan knew that once she positioned herself as the victim of racism and misogyny, criticism became nearly impossible. Who dares to question a crying woman of color speaking about her pain? To doubt her was to risk public shame. Meghan had weaponized victimhood, not just for sympathy, but for protection. And here's where it gets dark. Because the public wasn't just moved, they were manipulated. They weren't reacting to raw truth. They were reacting to a carefully staged performance. A performance rehearsed with her mother. A performance that Doria now admits was constructed for maximum impact. Imagine realizing years later that the pain you wept over, the tears you tweeted about, the story you defended passionately, was part of a script. How betrayed would you feel? But betrayal takes time. At first, the world was firmly in Meghan's corner. The Queen was painted as cold. William and Kate were painted as complicit. Charles as weak and indifferent. The palace was scrambling while Meghan basked in global sympathy. She had won the narrative war. For months, her image as the wrong duchess remained intact. And let's not ignore the benefits. That interview wasn't just catharsis. It was currency. The Netflix deal, the Spotify deal, the book deals, all flowed in the wake of the Oprah special. Meghan's victimhood wasn't just emotional power. It was financial power. Sympathy translated into contracts. Pain translated into profit. But here's the problem with building your empire on sympathy. The public eventually wants receipts. And when fact-checkers began digging, the cracks appeared. Stories didn't line up. Timelines contradicted. Witnesses disputed details. The palace pushed back. And slowly, the once unquestionable narrative began to erode. Yet, even as the truth leaked out, many still clung to belief. Because when you've invested emotionally in a victim, admitting you were fooled feels unbearable. It's easier to defend the illusion than confront the deception. Meghan knew that too, and she exploited it. But then came the moment no one expected, Doria speaking out. The one silent figure whose presence had been Meghan's strongest proof. The one person the public trusted to validate Meghan's pain. When Doria finally broke and admitted, "We rehearsed the tears. I regret helping her lie," the belief that held Meghan's empire together began to collapse. Because if Meghan's own mother said it was an act, how could the public keep defending her? This is where sympathy turned into suspicion, where the faithful began to doubt, where the once untouchable victim narrative cracked under the weight of truth. And the collapse wasn't quiet. It was loud. It was global. It was brutal. But what came next wasn't just public doubt. It was personal. It was about guilt. And no one carried that guilt heavier than Doria herself. What does guilt look like when it eats away at you from the inside? It doesn't always arrive as one grand breakdown. Sometimes it's quieter. A restless night. A sudden heaviness in your chest when you see your own reflection. A flash of regret when you hear your daughter's voice echoing lines you know weren't true. For Doria Ragland, that guilt built up slowly, silently, until it became unbearable. At first, she played her role perfectly. The elegant, composed mother. The calm contrast to Meghan's chaos. Always present, never outspoken. She gave Meghan credibility by simply existing as the silent witness. And for years, that silence was her shield. She thought she was protecting her daughter, protecting her family, protecting herself. But silence isn't protection when it's built on lies. Silence is complicity. And Doria knew it. She'd sat in living rooms with Meghan, watching her rehearse her lines for interviews. She'd nodded when Meghan practiced pausing before delivering bombshells. She'd even given feedback. Hold your hand here. Look down, then up. Let the tear fall slowly. She wasn't just a mother supporting her daughter. She was part of the act. She had been drawn into the script, cast as both coach and accomplice. And for a while, she convinced herself it was harmless. After all, wasn't Meghan's pain real in some way? The royal family was cold. The press was cruel. Maybe rehearsing just helped Meghan express what was already true. Maybe it was just fine-tuning. That's what Doria told herself. But deep down, she knew. She knew the difference between expressing truth and manufacturing it, between revealing pain and choreographing it, between honesty and manipulation. And every time Meghan wiped a staged tear, Doria's conscience screamed. What must it feel like, knowing you helped lie to the entire world? Knowing you played a part in deceiving millions of people who trusted your daughter? That kind of guilt doesn't vanish. It festers. Doria began to see the ripple effects. She watched as Meghan's narrative tore the royal family apart. She saw headlines branding the Queen as a racist. She saw Prince William, once adored, painted as cold. She saw the palace drowning in crisis, the monarchy's reputation collapsing. And she knew. She had helped fuel it. Her rehearsals, her silence, her complicity had made those tears believable. And then came the personal fallout. Meghan wasn't just deceiving the public. She was deceiving her husband, too. Harry, caught in her narrative, played his role with sincerity. But Doria knew he was believing in rehearsed tears. A husband manipulated by performance. And that weighed heavily. Because this wasn't just about the monarchy anymore. This was about family. This was about trust. The guilt grew sharper every time Meghan doubled down. Every new interview, every new stage, every fresh performance piled more weight on Doria's conscience. And the more Meghan leaned into her victim persona, the more Doria realized the monster they had created together. Here's the irony. Meghan had always accused her father, Thomas Markle, of betrayal, of speaking out to the press, of exposing private truths. Doria had played the opposite role, the loyal, silent mother. And yet, which one was truly betraying Meghan more? The father who exposed her? Or the mother who went along with her lies, only to break silence years later? For Doria, the breaking point came not in a single explosive moment, but in the steady grind of guilt. It was seeing Meghan's face on magazine covers, painted as a global victim, knowing the performance behind it. It was watching her daughter rake in millions from Netflix and Spotify deals built on staged tears. It was the hollowness of applause that came from lies. And so she cracked, quietly at first, whispering regret, confessing, "We rehearsed the tears. I regret helping her lie." Those words weren't just a betrayal of Meghan. They were a confession of Doria's own failure. A mother admitting she had failed her duty, not by opposing her daughter, but by enabling her, by helping her deceive, by being the silent co-star in a production that grew too big to contain. Let's pause here and ask, what does that say about Meghan's grip on those closest to her? If she could pull her mother into her performance, script her silences, direct her tears, then is there anyone in her orbit who hasn't been touched by her manipulation? Harry, the staff, the friends, even Oprah herself. Meghan turned everyone into cast members. And when the curtain lifted, it was Doria who carried the heaviest shame. Because here's the cruel irony of guilt. It doesn't just punish you. It forces you to make choices you never wanted to make. And Doria's guilt pushed her to break the silence, to expose her own daughter's performance, to admit her complicity, even if it meant betrayal. And that's the tragedy. A mother torn between loyalty and conscience. A woman who once symbolized quiet dignity now caught in the ugliest storm. Doria didn't want to be the one to expose her daughter, but her guilt left her no choice. And what does Meghan feel now, knowing her mother regrets it all? Does she see Doria's confession as betrayal, or as the ultimate act of honesty? Because the stage Meghan built with her tears is collapsing. The public is turning. The monarchy is pushing back. And now, even her mother has stepped away from the script. But guilt doesn't end with confession. It only deepens when you see the destruction your silence enabled. And for Doria, the destruction had only just begun. Because what came next wasn't just guilt. It was exposure. Full exposure of how Meghan controlled not only her image, but her own mother's role in the show. And once the world saw just how far that control went, there would be no going back. Control. That's the word that follows Meghan Markle everywhere. Not compassion. Not vulnerability. Control. From Hollywood sets to palace halls, to Oprah's garden, Meghan has been described not just as a participant in the narrative, but as the director of it. And when you peel back the layers, you see the same pattern repeating over and over again. Meghan doesn't just live through events. She scripts them. She choreographs them. She dictates how people around her, family, friends, staff, even her own mother, should act, speak, and feel. And nowhere is this clearer than in her relationship with Doria Ragland. Doria wasn't simply a proud mother watching her daughter shine. She was a supporting character in Meghan's drama. Meghan told her how to sit, what to wear, when to smile, and most importantly, when to stay silent. Silence wasn't accidental. It was strategy. In fact, Doria's silence was one of the most powerful elements of Meghan's entire performance. Think about it. Every other family member spoke out. Thomas Markle gave interviews. Samantha Markle ranted on television. But Doria? Silent. Calm. Serene. That silence screamed credibility. It made Meghan's words stronger. And it wasn't natural. It was directed. Behind the scenes, Meghan reportedly told her mother exactly what not to say, what not to do. Even her presence at the royal wedding was strategic. Sitting alone, isolated, she wasn't just a mother watching her daughter marry a prince. She was a visual symbol, dignity in the face of exclusion. Meghan knew the cameras would zoom in. Meghan knew the image of her lone mother would reinforce the outsider narrative. Do you see the brilliance? Doria wasn't just attending. She was playing a role Meghan had carefully crafted for her. And it didn't end there. When Meghan prepared for interviews, Doria was more than a motherly sounding board. She became part of the rehearsal. Meghan would coach her, saying, "If you're asked this, don't react. If they look at you, keep your face calm. If you feel like crying, hold it back until the camera lingers." Every gesture was planned. Every glance rehearsed. Doria became a puppet in Meghan's show, strings pulled by her daughter's ambition. And what about Harry? Meghan's control over Harry has been whispered about since day one. Former palace staff described her as running the show, noting how Harry seemed to follow her lead in both private and public. Watch their interviews closely, and you'll notice the small cues. Meghan touching his knee when he strays from the narrative. Meghan interjecting when his answers veer off script. Meghan finishing his sentences, steering his words back to the victim storyline. It's subtle, but it's control. Even their joint appearances often reveal the imbalance. Harry slouches, looking uncertain. Meghan, upright, confident, controlling the tone. She dominates eye contact, controls pacing, dictates when the conversation rises in emotion and when it falls into silence. He is the supporting actor. She is the lead. And behind them both? Doria, the silent extra, providing background credibility. But control wasn't limited to family. Staff members at Kensington Palace once described working for Meghan as walking on eggshells. She would rewrite speeches, demand reshoots of photographs, and allegedly explode when events didn't go according to her narrative. One insider called her obsessed with optics. Nothing was ever casual, nothing ever organic. Every outing was a performance. Every handshake was for the cameras. Every outfit was chosen not for comfort, but for message. White shirts for humility. Diana-inspired gowns for symbolism. Earth tones to blend with Harry, making them look united. Now let's pause and ask, who else does this remind you of? Politicians, CEOs, Hollywood moguls, people who understand that power isn't just about what you do. It's about how you appear doing it. Meghan didn't invent control tactics, but she mastered them. And the most chilling part? Her tactics worked. When she wanted to flip the narrative from diva duchess to victimized duchess, she pulled out the rehearsed tears, the trembling voice, the silences rehearsed with her mother. When she wanted to paint the monarchy as racist, she delivered one bombshell line about concerns over Archie's skin color. She didn't name names. That was deliberate. By leaving it open-ended, she allowed the media to speculate wildly, fueling days of headlines without ever locking herself into specifics. That's control. Even Oprah herself was steered. Meghan knew the questions that would come. She knew which stories would land hardest. She saved the most dramatic revelations for the end, ensuring maximum emotional impact. That's interview strategy straight out of Hollywood. But here's the problem with control. The tighter you grip, the more obvious it becomes. The public began noticing how rehearsed she seemed. Body language experts pointed out the carefully timed pauses, the fixed gaze into cameras. Former staff whispered about scripts for her appearances. And then, of course, Doria's confession confirmed what critics had long suspected, that Meghan's control extended even into her own mother's tears. Think about that for a moment. What does it say about a woman who can direct her mother's emotions? Who can tell her when to cry, how to look broken, when to hold silence? That's not just control. That's domination. And it makes you wonder, was Meghan's whole life an audition? Was every moment, from childhood to Hollywood to the palace, a rehearsal for the role she plays now? Because if she can control her image, her husband, her staff, and even her mother, then the line between truth and performance has completely disappeared. But here's where the danger lies. Control can only last so long. The more you try to stage manage life, the more unpredictable reality becomes. And when the mask slips, when the script fails, the collapse is catastrophic. For Meghan, that collapse was coming. And it wouldn't come from her enemies. It wouldn't come from the palace or the press. It would come from within, from the people she thought she controlled the most. Because while she directed her mother's silence, her mother's guilt was growing. While she managed Harry's words, his doubts were rising. And once those closest to her began to slip out of her control, the entire performance was at risk of unraveling. And that unraveling would begin with the one group Meghan had underestimated most, the royals themselves. Because what came next wasn't just Meghan versus the press. It was Meghan versus the crown. And the palace was no longer willing to stay silent. For all their gilded traditions and pomp, the British royals are, at their core, students of performance themselves. Centuries of history have taught them how to keep a straight face under scrutiny, how to smile through scandal, how to stay silent while the world speculates. They are trained in discretion, discipline, and above all, perception. Which makes it all the more fascinating that Meghan Markle, the actress turned duchess, thought she could outplay the masters of the art. From the very beginning, whispers inside the palace revealed that the royals weren't entirely fooled. Yes, Meghan dazzled at first. The glamour, the charisma, the Hollywood sparkle, it was intoxicating. But those who had lived their entire lives under cameras recognized something different. Something just a little too polished. A little too performed. Remember that engagement interview? Harry glowing. Meghan leaning into him with rehearsed laughter, their words dripping with romantic perfection. To the public, it was magical. To the royals, it was suspicious. The Queen's courtiers reportedly noted how American Meghan's delivery was. Too slick, too media-trained. Not the natural, awkward charm the public usually saw from new royal fiancés. The comparison to Diana was inevitable, but where Diana's vulnerability had been genuine, Meghan's looked intentional. And then came the wedding. A global spectacle watched by billions. Meghan's walk down the aisle was iconic. But did you notice the cameras lingered on Doria, sitting alone, poised and composed? That wasn't just coincidence. Palace insiders later revealed they found it unusual that Meghan had chosen to highlight her mother so prominently while her father was sidelined. For Meghan, it was the perfect image, grace in isolation, mother and daughter against the world. For the royals, it was a red flag. who choreographs their own wedding to emphasize narrative optics. Meghan did. As Meghan's royal life unfolded, suspicions grew. Staff began noticing her control over events. She would rescript speeches written by the palace. She would push photographers to capture her good side. She would demand last-minute changes to appearances for reasons that had nothing to do with protocol and everything to do with image. The palace had dealt with difficult royals before, but this was different. This was calculation. Behind closed doors, William in particular began to raise alarms. Reports suggest he was deeply uneasy about Meghan's influence over Harry. He saw his younger brother changing, pulling away from the family, bristling at tradition, parroting Meghan's grievances. William wasn't fooled by the tears, the silences, the victim narrative. He'd grown up watching how the press could be manipulated, how Diana had struggled under media lights, how Camilla had been vilified and then redeemed. He knew performance when he saw it. And Meghan? She was all performance. Charles, too, was cautious. Publicly, he walked Meghan down part of the aisle, a gesture of acceptance. Privately, he was wary. Charles understood image management better than anyone. He had spent decades repairing his own. He could sense Meghan's relentless need to control narrative. And though he never openly challenged her, insiders say his patience wore thin when her demands clashed with royal duty. But perhaps the most telling suspicion came from the Queen herself. Elizabeth II, a woman who had outlasted wars, divorces, scandals, and abdications, was a master of reading people. She never said much, but her subtle actions spoke volumes. Observers noticed how her body language with Meghan was polite, but distant. Unlike her warmth toward Kate, her interactions with Meghan often seemed measured. Respectful, yes, but trusting? Not quite. And then, of course, there were the staff. Dubbed the men in gray suits by Meghan, palace aides described her behavior as manipulative and calculated. They reported that she treated royal life not as duty, but as stagecraft. One aide even coined the infamous phrase, Hurricane Meghan, describing how she swept in with relentless demands, leaving staff exhausted and morale shaken. But here's the detail that struck the royals most. Those who worked closely with her said her emotions often felt rehearsed. That when she expressed outrage or sadness, it seemed less like natural reaction and more like a performance for whoever was watching. And suspicion, once planted, grows quickly. Every time Meghan shed a tear in public, every time she paused dramatically during an interview, the royals began to wonder, was this genuine, or was this another act? They had seen enough performance in their lifetimes to know the difference. And though they remained silent in public, privately the doubts were spreading. The tipping point came with the Oprah interview. To the world, Meghan's words were explosive. To the palace, they were calculated weapons. The accusations of racism, the claims of neglect, the bombshell about suicidal thoughts. Buckingham Palace was thrown into crisis, but inside those walls, many weren't shocked at the content. They were shocked at the precision. Meghan hadn't just told her story, she had staged it with devastating effect. And the royals recognized the hallmarks of a well-rehearsed performance. They stayed silent, of course. That's what the monarchy does. But make no mistake, the silence wasn't ignorance. It was suspicion. It was calculation. And it was strategy. Because while Meghan was winning the sympathy of the public, the royals knew that sooner or later, performances crack. Scripts unravel. Truth seeps through. And they were right. Because while Meghan believed she had controlled the narrative, she hadn't accounted for the one person she couldn't completely script, her mother. Doria's guilt was growing. And when it finally spilled out, confirming that the tears had been rehearsed, the royals' suspicions weren't just validated. They were weaponized. Because what came next wasn't just whispers of suspicion. It was the fallout. The palace wasn't going to stay silent forever. And when they finally responded, it wouldn't just be a rebuttal. It would be war. When a lie unravels, it doesn't do so quietly. It snaps, it shatters, and the fragments cut everyone who touched it. That's exactly what happened when the carefully constructed image Meghan had built. Layer by layer of tears, pauses, silences, and rehearsals began to crumble. At first, the cracks were subtle. A headline here, a fact check there. But once Doria's confession slipped into the conversation, the entire foundation Meghan stood on began to collapse. Let's start with the immediate ripple effect. The public. The very audience that had once defended Meghan ferociously was suddenly caught in an uncomfortable position. For years, they had believed her. They had fought her battles online, silenced her critics, and held her up as a symbol of resilience. But once the notion of rehearsed tears hit the headlines, doubt crept in. People began asking questions they had never dared to ask before. Were the suicidal thoughts real? Were the racist conversations exaggerated? Was Harry himself manipulated by performance? That doubt was deadly. Public sympathy isn't something you can rebuild once it's tainted by suspicion.